Hi everyone, it's me Grace. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. So we're back at it again with another video, and today I'm going to be talking all about my interview experience, my Oxford University interview experience. So if you don't know, Oxford, I think for every course, yeah, they do interviews, and it's just one of those things in the application process that they're going to use to decide whether or not they want you as a student. Interviews are quite important because that's the only time where they'll actually get to meet you, actually get to talk to you face to face. Mine was online because of COVID, but even then, just like speak to you, see your face. And that interview, they give you some questions, some problems, or some reading, whatever your course is, and they basically see how you think. So they basically want to see you as a student and to see whether or not you will thrive in that Oxford environment. So they're quite important. They can be quite nerve-wracking. So I'm here to talk about my chemistry interviews specifically, but also give some general advice for interviews. So if you want that, keep watching. So I'm going to divide this video into 3 parts. The first part is going to be what I did to prepare for my interviews, right? The second part is going to be talking about my chemistry interviews, like in depth. So timestamps will be in the description. And then the third part is going to be me just giving some general advice for interviews. So first, how did I prepare for my Oxford interviews? I feel like the interviews are designed in a way where you can't really prepare for them that well. They're trying to get you off guard. They just want to see you in your element, essentially. They want to see raw. They want to see what you are like as a student. So you can't really do too much to prepare for them. You don't know what they're going to ask you. They could literally ask you anything, right? Like about your subject. So the first thing I did was obviously to look over my personal statement, because they could have asked me about something that I wrote in my personal statement. The Oxford personal statement is very academic, right? So I wrote a lot about books I read, lectures I watched, what I found interesting from those lectures, from those books. So they might have just asked me, oh, tell me a bit more about this. Or maybe an interview problem could have stemmed from some of the academic stuff that I talked about in my personal statement. So I looked over the notes that I made when I read the book. So when I read the books that I put in my personal statement, I wrote notes as I was reading them so that I wouldn't have to reread them. So I read the notes just to refresh my memory about okay, what actually went on in the book. I did rewatch. I think I rewatched the lecture that I mentioned. I basically just went through my personal statement line by line, and I thought of a question that they could ask me based on that line, and I was making sure that I would be able to understand it. So if they asked me about anything, I wouldn't be caught off guard. So I also asked friends and family to read my personal statement and ask me questions based on it, and I think that was quite useful. All of that work, and I didn't get asked about my personal statement at all, but they might have, so you generally don't know. So the first thing you can do is obviously just to make sure that your personal statement, if they ask you anything on it, you'll be good. The second thing I did was I went through my whole A-level spec. So everything that I'd done up to that point, I went through it and I made sure that I understood it, not just memorized it, not just knew the content as in what are the reagents and conditions, but that I genuinely understood every mechanism, that I understood all the maths, everything. Because the questions that they ask you aren't very straightforward. They aren't just going to be fact, active recall, but they're going to use the knowledge, right? The understanding that you have of your subject as a whole. So I made sure that, all the core chemistry stuff like bonding, stuff like, all just basically that I just knew and I just understood my chemistry, because the questions are going to be more advanced than A-level, but they're going to use A-level principles. So make sure that you know those principles very well. Don't worry about reading ahead. Don't feel tempted to read ahead. I remember somebody told me that learning the whole of A2 organic would have been useful, but the interview isn't a test of knowledge. So if they ask you a question and it's oh, actually, I don't really know too much about that because I haven't learned that yet, they'll probably either teach it to you there on the spot, so they'll tell you about it if it isn't too complicated, or they'll be like, oh, okay, that's fine, and they'll switch the question. They want to see what you do with the information you know and how far they can stretch you. But obviously, they're not going to be able to stretch you on a topic that you know nothing of. So don't feel like you need to cram stuff that you haven't learned yet, because then it might actually just not work out for you. Because if they ask you about it, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know it, because you self-taught yourself, but you don't fully understand it because nobody actually taught it to you. You taught yourself. And so in the interview, if you don't do as well, they might think, oh, you're not very bright, but it's just that you never really understood the topic because it was never taught to you. So I feel like just go reinforce what you have been taught and make sure that you fully understand what you have been taught instead of trying to go ahead. That's what I would say. So the next thing I did was I tried to find interview questions online. So I Googled Oxford chemistry interview questions, and there were some questions that came up. Some of them were like the very abstract ones, like the very, crazy ones, like, oh, what's the mass of air in this room? Or like how many hydrogen ions are there in this bottle? Or like, why is there salt in the sea? That literally was one of the questions there. They had like a long list of questions, right? Don't get too scared about these questions because chances are you won't really be asked something like this. Or if you are, like, remember, they will help you through it. It's not just going to be, what's the mass of air in this room? Go. And then you just have to sit there. Like, they help you through it. You know what I mean? So don't get too scared with these questions. But it's a good practice to think about these things, try and think outside the box, because that's what you're going to have to do in your interview. And if you can get somebody, preferably somebody who knows about your subject, to do like interview practice with you, like where you like speak your answers out loud, that's really helpful, because you just need to get into the habit of talking about your subject out loud. So me and my friend, we would like every morning, not every morning, but a few mornings a week, we would do like interview prep. That's what we called it. And then she was applying for medicine. So first we'd do chemistry. So she would ask me a question and then I would like just talk about it. And she did chemistry A level. So like it was good because she actually understood what I was talking about. She could maybe ask me about it. And then I would ask her medicine questions. So just, even if the person doesn't know about your subject, like, I don't know, I didn't do biology A level. So when she was talking about all the biological stuff, like, I wasn't too sure, but still, just her being able to talk about it, that's the good thing. So talking about your subject out loud, even to yourself, you just need to practice being able to voice your thoughts, to think out loud, because that's what you need to do in your interview. So let's get into my interviews. I'm going to talk a bit about my interviews. I won't be able to tell you guys exactly what I was asked in my interview, just because like they made us like sign something to say that we wouldn't tell. So I'm not trying to have my place removed, and I know it's really annoying because when I was applying, I wanted to know what people were asked, right? But yeah, I think they do recycle some of the questions, so I can't really tell you guys. But I will try my best to talk about the kind of questions I was asked and stuff like that, and how I went about answering them and all that kind of stuff. So for a chemistry interview, your interview can be like on 4 main things. So what I mean like is inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry, organic chemistry, or just maths. Because the Oxford course is very mathematical, so they could very much just give you pure maths to do. So these major branches will be divided in your interviews. So for me, my first interview was just purely inorganic, and then my second interview was organic and physical. So I actually didn't get asked any maths questions, but it could have been, it really depends on the college. You could get a whole math interview or a whole physical interview. Like, how it's distributed, it depends on the college. So when they invite you to interview, they'll tell you who is interviewing you. So you can Google them and see what they teach, and then that's going to let you know like what kind of chemistry is going to be in your interview. So my first interviewer was I think he was an inorganic lecturer, so I knew it was going to be inorganic. And then my second interview, there was a organic tutor and a physical lecturer, so I knew it was going to be organic and physical. So that's how so I was kind of prepping for that. Apologies for any lighting changing, guys. The sun is setting, but I've already gotten this far into the video, so I'm not going to stop now. For my inorganic one, what he kind of did was he started off really easy. So he tried to like ease me into it, which was quite nice. So I'll just let you guys know like the first few questions he asked me, just because they were literally so easy. So he asked me, he was like, what's the structure of nitrogen? Like, literally probably a year 10 could answer that, right? So I said like N2, like N triple bonded to another N. And then he started asking me about like the bonds and stuff. So he started off very easy. He said, what's the structure of nitrogen? He asked me about oxygen. He said, what's the structure of oxygen? Right? Stuff like that. And then it did build up, but it started off with, it will probably start off with things that you know. So you feel like, okay, this is not too bad. And then it builds up, right? So there will be a point in the interview where you will get stuck, right? Because that's how it's designed. And that's okay. The aim is to see how you respond when you are stuck. It's not for you to get everything right. In fact, if you get everything right, that's not what they want. They want you to get stuck, and they want to see what you do when you are stuck. So when you're stuck, guys, when you're asked a question and you're actually like, hold on, I don't really know, literally just think of like anything that you know about the topic, because there's no way that you know nothing, right? So think of any kind of information that can be relevant, right? And say it. Remember, think out loud. Don't think in your mind, because if you just sit there in silence, they're gonna think you're a bit, not they're gonna think you're dumb, but they're not gonna know what's going on, and they might assume that your mind is just blank, right? When it's not, you're actually thinking, and that's what they need to see. They need to see how you're thinking. So make sure that you say anything. Like maybe they ask you a question and you're like, let's say it has like bromine and stuff. You're like, okay, let me give you guys an example of like thinking out loud. So I just this is just random, right? So it's like, well, I can see we have bromine, and I know that bromine is more electronegative than carbon. So this bond is polar. Like, this is very basic, right? Initially, I thought, why would I say this out loud? Like, they know that, I know that. But that's fine, because they will guide, they might say, oh, yes, that's right. So because bromine is more electronegative, what do you think this could, do you know what I mean? They're going to give you hints. They want to see how you respond to the hints that they give you. But if you don't even say what you're thinking in the first place, they're not going to be able to hint at you, and that's not going to help. So it could have gone another way. You could have started talking about electronegativity, and they might have been like, well, do you think electronegativity is really relevant here? Because da-da-da. And then you'd be like, oh, actually, no, you're right. That probably doesn't matter because da-da-da. That's good. That's showing that you're able to revoke your thought. You're able to know where you've gone wrong and then instead think of something else. So you're like, okay, so electronegativity isn't relevant. Does it maybe have to do with da-da-da? And then you think, well, I know that this, and I've been taught that this, just think out loud. Like, this is what you'd be thinking in your head, right? But just vocalize that. And they'll be like, yes, that's right. So maybe, like, do you know what I mean? So they'll be very helpful. So that's why you shouldn't be too nervous, right? They're not trying to catch you out. They're trying to help you. They want you. You just need to show them that, yeah, that you can work with them. So take what they give you and be flexible with it, especially if it's a humanities subject. They want to see flexibility of thought. They want to see that you're able to take an idea and then analyze it. Like, think, okay, that's not right, so instead this is right. Okay, but maybe that's not right because this, so it's probably gonna be this. They want to see how you problem solve, essentially. So that was my first interview. The guy was very nice. Honestly, I feel like he probably spoke more than I spoke. Like, it really felt like a mock tutorial. Like, he would go on, he'd be like, yeah, that's right. We know that ammonia is da-da-da-da, because actually ammonia is involved in this process called the Haber process. Do you know about that? And I would be like, yeah. And he'd be like, yeah, that's great. So basically, and he would just like go on. And then at the end of his like 2-minute lecture, he would be like, oh, so how do you think this would happen? And then I would be like, da-da-da-da. And he'd be like, yeah, that's right, because da-da-da-da. And he would go on for a bit. Honestly, it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like a mock tutorial, which is what the interview is meant to be. So not all interviews are like this. My second one wasn't like this, but my first one was like this, and yours may very well be. Try and enjoy it. Try and, learn from them. Like, I was really enjoying that first one. Honestly, my first interview was quite nice. Not because I was getting everything right, but because, we were able to dialogue and just talk about chemistry and solve chemistry problems. And, that's how you should see it. Not as a test, but, as a good opportunity. So, yeah. My second interview was much different to my first one, and I'm glad that it came second. So first, I had the organic side, right? So these people were very like straight-faced. Like, my inorganic one, he was so smiley. Oh, such a nice man. These people, I'm sure they're nice as well, but they didn't show it, at least. They were like, okay, yeah, so this is the interview. So, right? And these questions, the first question she asked me in my organic one was, can you draw any A-level mechanism? Literally, guys, they start off easy. They try to ease you into it. So I was like, anyone? She was like, yeah. I was like, okay. So I drew the one with ethene reacting with bromine. And she was like, okay, great. And then she then moved on to something else. So sometimes it starts quite easy, guys. Like, don't be too scared. So then we moved on to something else. And like I said, I can't really tell you guys exactly what the questions were, but it got progressively harder. One thing I do want to say, right, is if they ask you a question, like, she asked me this question, and there were like a few ways that there were a few like answers that I had in my head to the question. Like, right? And there was one answer that was like, actually, I know quite a lot about this topic. So I said this answer. And she was like, oh, you know about that? Okay. And then she then started asking me more about that. And that was good for me because I knew a lot about it and I had done practice on it. So essentially, you can basically you're able to veer the interview in the direction that you wanted to go in. Remember, you answered the question. So if you mention something, they might be like, oh, actually, that's a good point. Let me ask you more about this. So try not to mention things that you're not really too sure on, because if they ask you more about it, you'll be a bit actually like, actually, I don't really know. Try and bring things that you know well into the interview. But obviously don't bring it where it's not relevant. Like, don't force it. Like, if it's not relevant, you're just gonna look dumb. But if it's relevant, then bring it up, because then the next question might be on that topic that you just brought up. Because the interview really just, like, the course of the interview depends on the person. They might have a few questions they want to start with, but then the other question that they ask will be honestly based on what you say. So you can try and like veer it in your direction if you can. I definitely did that in my organic one and it worked well in my favor. So yeah, I'm happy about that. The second part of my interview was physical chemistry, and this one was definitely different to my organic side and the inorganic interview, in the sense that he didn't start off with like easy questions and then build up. He basically gave me one big question. So it was kind of like those questions where it's like, what's the mass of air in this room? Or those kind of questions where it's like, you hear it and you're like, what? Like, what am I supposed to do? But you have to like break it down step by step. So there's two scenarios. You can get a small buildable type interview, or you can they'll throw a big question at you and then you have to like break it down. So that's what happened in my physical one. He asked me this big question, but because I had done those kind of questions before, like in my interview prep, I wasn't too taken aback. So when he asked me that question, I was just like, okay, where do we start? Just think, like, how would you actually start? Like, okay, maybe just start somewhere and then just go with that. And he was helping me along the way, like, so definitely just don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, don't ask too many questions, but maybe if you're unsure of something, if you need them to clarify something, you don't know the meaning of anything, definitely ask. Like, let them know. Maybe ask them, do you think that this would work? Don't do that too many times, because then they're gonna think that you're a bit unsure. Like, at the end of the day, they're not gonna answer the question for you. It's for you to answer it. But if you're really unsure, really, really, really stuck, you can actually be like, actually, I'm actually not too sure how we go about this. I'm thinking this, but I'm not really too sure. They might be like, well, how about this? They might give you a little hint. They'll give you a little bone to chew, and you're like, oh, okay. And they want to see how you respond to that. So definitely don't be like so uptight and feel like you need to get a perfect answer. And if you don't understand, you're just going to sit there like frozen. Like, that's not gonna, if you don't understand, you're better off asking than sitting there like a statue. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so that's basically how my interviews went. So yeah, I definitely feel like my first interview was better than my second one, but they were around the same. The second interviewers were definitely less expressive. Like my first interviewer, whenever I got things right, he was very much like, yeah, that's right, great, da-da-da. The second interviewer was just like, oh yeah. Even when I started doing something wrong, and they were just looking at me, they let me do it. And then after a while, when I was like, hold on, they were like, yeah, actually, do you think that's right? And then they kind of helped me a bit. But I guess they wanted to see whether I'd figure out that it was wrong. And I did get to a point where I was like, and then they helped me. So, they don't just leave you there to fend for yourself. They do help you a bit, So don't worry too much about it, guys. Nerves will literally like ruin your chances. So don't get too nervous. Like, obviously nerves is natural. Like, I was nervous, of course, but don't be so nervous that you're scared to speak, like, because then they're not going to be able to see what kind of student you are. So try and think of it, look at it in a different lens. Look at it as a mock tutorial, an opportunity to show yourself, to show your worth, to show what you can do. And hopefully that will take some of the nerves away. I do want to say I did do a lot of maths prep, so this probably I should have said this at the beginning. So I knew that for chemistry, and I know for like physics and like the physical sciences, they like to ask maths questions, and they like to particularly ask like graph sketching questions. So they'll ask you to sketch like really complex graphs, like maybe like e to the sine x or sine of cos of x, or graphs that you probably will never like encounter at A level and are quite like, what, how do you do that? So there are a few videos online on YouTube like talking about graph sketching. Like me, I just made up random graphs like e to the sine x, or what do you call it, sine squared x. No, that's easy. Like e, like I don't know, like, you know, like complex stuff. I'll put some on the screen, like some complex graphs, and like practice sketching them. Like, how would you go about sketching them, and stuff like that? Because I know a lot of people do get asked that. It just really depends on the college what kind of things you're asked. So I wasn't asked that, but I practice so much for graph sketching. So if you're applying for chemistry, I would recommend that you do that. Don't neglect the maths, because you may very well be asked maths. So yeah. So now just some general advice. So some general advice I would give is just to try and get as many mock interviews as you can. You know, ask your school, ask teachers at your school for them. Sign up to mentoring schemes to get mentors. Ask people on LinkedIn. Literally, like, you're only gonna get this opportunity once, right? Don't be shy. Like, you rather bug people and get in than not bug people and then not get in and then wish that you bugged people. Like, no, don't be shy. So me, I was messaging people like, hi, could you help me? Literally finding mentors, stuff like that. I had like about 5 mock interviews, and a few of them were actually very, very helpful. So yeah, so that's just an opportunity to talk about my subject. Make sure your mock interviews are academic and they're not like, why chemistry, why Oxford, because they probably won't ask you that in your real thing. So yeah, remember to go over your personal statement. Remember to breathe, take deep breaths, don't be too nervous. And yeah, that's pretty much it for my video on interviews, Oxbridge interviews. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you found it helpful, please give it a like. Make sure to share it with people, subscribe to my channel, and leave any comments below. Are you worried for your interview? Do you have any questions about interviews, anything like that? Just leave comments down below. And yeah, I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!